9/11, 2001. Terrorists who call themselves warriors of God against the Crusaders of the West. Two religions that demand peace, yet wage war throughout history. Epochs of confrontation and collaboration. Peoples and powers who fight in the name of God, but who struggle for supremacy on earth. It's the 7th century AD, the advance of Islam. United in faith, Muslims are forging a global empire. No power seems capable of stopping their advance. Will the banners of the new religion soon be flying over Europe? A decisive battle looms. Christian warriors against the sword of the Prophet. Late October, 732 AD. Frankish soldiers on patrol along the southern border of the Kingdom of the Franks, alerted by news of an advancing enemy. The danger is closer than they think. The forests near the city of Tours will be the battleground against warriors from the desert. They are scouts from a Muslim expeditionary force. They know that an army of Franks is expecting them. Their task is to find out how strong the Franks really are. For the Frankish patrol, the enemy scouts remain invisible. The precursor to a battle that will shape history.
Los, weg hier, ich habe genug gesehen.
The Muslim scouts have seen enough. The Franks have amassed a huge army. The recruits are mainly craftsmen and farmers. They've been turned into Western Europe's largest army, under the leadership of Charles Martel. Bishop Milo of Trier, himself an experienced war leader, is in awe of Martel, who's forged an army that is second to none. His secret, iron discipline. Charles Martel is a Frankish nobleman with a reputation for being tough and fearless in the face of the enemy. His nickname, Martel, the Hammer. He knows that battles aren't won by reputation alone. Who are these foreign warriors who have invaded Western Europe? South of Tours, the Moorish attackers have made their camp. Are they here to pillage or conquer? The Moors intend to be well prepared before they go into battle.
Wie viele sind es?
They haven't expected such a large army. The Franks seem to be well armed and ready for combat. So far, no one has been able to halt the Moorish advance. But Abdurrahman is convinced that the Christians are underestimating the strength of the Moors.
It can be assumed that the Franks didn't have very detailed knowledge of the invaders. They described the North African Moors as Saracens, a very general term, or as Ismailites, They also called them infidels. This was simply a way of saying they were not Christians, but heathens. It would be wrong to say that the Franks or Charles Martel had a very detailed knowledge of the invaders.
21 years earlier, in the summer of 711, the Moorish army had landed on the south coast of Spain. News of the foreign invasion reached the capital of the Iberian kingdom, Toledo. It was ruled by Christians. The Spanish king, Rodrigo, prayed for God's help in facing the danger from the south. The Muslims had amassed 12,000 warriors for the conquest of Spain. To the Christian defenders, they looked like invaders from an alien world. On the Rio Guadalete in the south of Andalusia, the armies clashed. Spain's Christian rule came to an end with the death of Rodrigo. Within 8 years, the Moors conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula. Making Cordoba their capital, they marched across the Pyrenees. Then, in 732, they arrive at Tours. The leader of the Muslim army is Abdul Rahman, governor of Al-Andalus, Moorish Spain. The emir is considered ambitious and skillful. He'll go down in history if he gets his way.
Den Männern reicht es. Sie haben genug Beute gemacht. Sie wollen nach Hause zurück.
The troops are weary. They want to return home with the loot from recent battles. But Abdul Rahman wants to defeat the Franks. The city of Tours is full of riches, ready for the taking. He's determined to attack.
Es bleibt dabei, wir greifen an.
The Muslims take up position outside Tours. Their presence is a threat to one of the most important spiritual centers of Christian Europe. It was Saint Martin of Tours who'd brought fame to the city. In 361, he'd founded the first Christian monastery in the West. Veneration of the saint made Tours one of the most important places of pilgrimage in Europe.
Tours played a major religious role within the Frankish kingdom. The city contained the tomb of St. Martin, by now the Franks' most important patron saint. The city also possessed St. Martin's cloak, one of the most precious religious relics of the country.
What had begun with St. Martin was completed one Christmas day at the end of the 5th century. The baptism of King Clovis I in Reims Cathedral marked the triumph of the Christian faith, which became the official state religion under the Franks. Baptist churches like Saint-Jean de Poitiers testified to the preeminence of Christianity. In 721, the imminent attack of a Muslim army threatens the Christian order.
Die Mauern haben unsere Kirchen entweiht.
Bishop Milo laments the desecration and the looting of church buildings. Martel is determined to put a stop to this.
Mir die Ehre der ersten Attacke.
Odo of Aquitaine wants to lead the attack with his horsemen.
Tut mir leid, Fürst Odo.
But Charles Martel knows how to make better use of them.
Und für eure Reiter habe ich einen besseren Plan.
Odo is a former opponent of Charles Martel, but the Muslim danger obliges him to form an alliance with his old foe.
Despite the cordial alliance between Charles Martel and Odo, their relationship was a rather tense one. We know this because Charles Martel fought 2 campaigns against Odo in 731. But in the end, it was the common danger that obliged both of them to fight the Moors instead.
Are their Christian allegiances strong enough to help them master the new challenge together?
Und wanderte ich auch im finsteren Todestal,
At the time of battle, both sides draw strength from their faiths.
Herrn der Welt, dem Barmherzigen und Gnädigen, der am Tag des Gerichts regiert.
Du bereitest vor mir einen Tisch.
Bishop Milo asks the God of the Christians for help.
Und Gnade werden mir folgen mein Leben lang. Und ich werde bleiben im Haus des Herrn immer da.
Dir dienen wir.
Abdul Rahman prays to Allah for his support.
Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen.
In early medieval warfare, God and the saints played a crucial role as helpers on the battlefield. Before a battle, divine assistance was invoked, either through religious processions or through prayer.
Kämpft für Allah!
Abdul Rahman promises his warriors direct entry to paradise. Is the collision between Muslim and Christian armies near Tours a clash of faiths, or is it just a conflict between two ambitious military leaders? There are no negotiations. Win or die. That's the attitude of both sides as they enter the fray in central France.
Bringt die Bogenschützen in Stellung.
Abdul Rahman and Charles Martel take up position.
Männer, haltet stand, weicht nicht!
The Christians put their trust in God.
استعدوا للرماية!
But they also rely on their powerful shields.
هيا ارموا! تقدموا الآن! الله أكبر!
The Muslims charge toward the Frankish infantry. The crucial phase of the battle has begun. Will the 25th of October, 732, become Christendom's fateful turning point, as is claimed in posterity? Tours marked the northernmost point of an expansion that had started a century earlier. The Muslims had conquered North Africa, Spain, and parts of Asia Minor. In the west, their empire bordered on the kingdom of the Franks. In the north, on Byzantium. The Muslim power center was Damascus, but it was Mecca where Islam originated. It all began with a cosmic event. A meteor had smashed into the Arabian Peninsula. The rock that fell from heaven was considered a divine sign. It inspired the founding of the Mecca of pilgrims. Long before the birth of Islam, a cult site formed around the sacred rock, the Kaaba, the Arabic word for cube. Not only the meteor was venerated here, there were also gods with names like Hubal, Alat, and Usa. As the centuries passed, Mecca developed into the largest cult center in Arabia. But in the year 610, a religion was born here that changed everything. Muslim legends claim that the beginnings of Islam were accompanied by mysterious events. The stories revolve around a man named Muhammad, whose search for the true faith led him to a cave near Mecca. Purification and fasting were among his rituals in these rocky corridors. In the year 610, the seeker appeared to find answers to his questions. Precisely how the divine message reached the future prophet remains a mystery. But the words are clear. They speak of a jihad, of the struggle to establish the only true God, and of a radical rejection of all forms of polytheism. Spread the word, spread the word. A voice apparently instructed him. Muhammad was to announce the message of Islam, of voluntary submission to God.
The
Quran talks of a spirit that is hard to identify. In the later version of the Quran, Muslims identified this spirit with the angel Gabriel.
According to legend, Muhammad was in contact with heavenly beings for 2 decades. He was unable to read or write, so during his encounters, the word of God was written on his heart and placed upon his tongue, or so tradition says. The prophet then passed on the divine revelations to his followers by means of the spoken word. Even during Muhammad's lifetime, people began to write down his words. They included the 5 sacred duties that every Muslim has to fulfill: acceptance of the one true God, daily prayer, charitable giving, fasting, and pilgrimages to Mecca. That's where Muhammad began to preach the message of Allah, provoking fierce protests as a result.
Muslim tradition tells us that when Muhammad began to act as a prophet, he was already 40 years old, not young by the standards of the time. He was a mature man and well known in his community, so you can imagine the amount of astonishment, disbelief, and even hostility there must have been in the reaction of his contemporaries.
Even his role as a prophet upset many people. Muhammad's call for the abolition of polytheism posed an economic threat to the place of pilgrimage. Together with his followers, Muhammad was driven out of Mecca. The departure from Mecca in the year 622 marks the start of a new calendar for Muslims and a further interpretation of jihad.
Muhammad began spreading the word peacefully at first, while still in Mecca. After the move to Medina, he was armed against attacks from outside. He also initiated violence himself.
The caravans and commercial centers of Mecca became the target of an armed jihad, which had now become synonymous with the armed struggle for the faith. Muhammad personally ordered the attacks. The man of faith had become a warlord. 48 battles were chronicled in the early phase of Islam, and the Prophet himself took part in half of them. But the Muslim warriors had to follow a strict system of regulations.
Sie haben gekämpft und sich nicht ergeben. Sie müssen sterben.
Some Muslim warriors want to kill any women and children who had refused to surrender. But Islamic martial law only permits them to be sold as slaves.
Aber das Geld, das wir für sie bekommen,
Of the loot, 4 out of 5 parts go to the warriors. The 5th part belongs to Allah and to his prophet Muhammad, but also to the orphans and the poor.
So wie es geschrieben steht.
This martial law stipulated all kinds of things, from legitimizing armed combat in the first place to regulations about how to end battles and wars, and how to treat combatants and non-combatants, and also how to deal with women and children.
After 8 years of struggle, the supporters of Islam successfully conquered Mecca. Muhammad didn't want to take revenge against his former persecutors. The wrath of the prophet was directed exclusively against the gods in the Kaaba. This iconoclasm at the sacred site of Mecca was also a political act. The old power structures in Arabia were smashed, along with the ancient cult figures. And the Christian faith, which had its place among all the other confessions in Mecca, suddenly had a powerful rival. The success of Islam was nowhere more evident than in the development of Mecca. Over the centuries, the regional cult center with the Kaaba became the most visited place of pilgrimage in the world. Every year, 3 million people make the pilgrimage to Islam's most important holy site. Shared rituals and prayers strengthen the communal spirit of the faithful, who gather here from every corner of the planet. With 1.4 billion adherents, Islam has become the second largest religion in the world, after Christianity. The followers of the Prophet laid the foundations for this many centuries ago. The preachers in Mecca spread the word of the Prophet Muhammad. It's a Muslim's duty to go to war and fight for Allah. Until the last days and the end of the world, there would always be warriors fighting the jihad. They claim that those who fight for Allah, whether they live or die in battle, will be rewarded in paradise. The sword of the Prophet was no longer used exclusively for defense, but also for the spread of Islam. Would jihad turn into holy war?
Holy war is a relatively clear term. It means to wage war for religious reasons and to kill for religious reasons. Jihad is a word that has many more meanings. The word is actually derived from the Arab word jahada, which means to make a great effort. This can be an effort to become a better Muslim or to give handouts to the poor. So to limit the meaning of jihad to holy war is quite wrong.
And yet, within a few years, the entire Arabian Peninsula was conquered in the name of the Islamic faith. Then, the Muslim warriors turned their attention to the neighboring empires to the north and east. In the year 636, the adherents of the new faith reached Damascus. The siege of the city lasted over a year. Eventually, a treaty of surrender was signed with the Christian bishop of Damascus that made the Arabs' modus operandi clear.
The others were dealt with pragmatically. This can be seen from the way that subjugated people were treated. They were discriminated against socially, but they weren't necessarily forced into apostasy, that is, into a renunciation of their own faith.
Very soon, the empire of Islam extended as far as India and Uzbekistan. Along the Silk Road to China, magnificent mosques bear witness to Islam's heyday in Central Asia. Jerusalem was conquered in the first half of the 7th century and torn from the grasp of Christian Byzantium. After the fall of Egypt, the breadbasket of the Middle East now belonged to Islam. North Africa was conquered very quickly. At the beginning of the 8th century, the Muslims arrived at the Straits of Gibraltar. The massive rock constituted the gateway to Western Europe for the invaders. In early 711, an invasion fleet crossed the straits. The ships from North Africa and their 12,000 soldiers also brought their pack mules and horses to the south coast of Europe. In Spain, people wondered where these strange-looking warriors had come from.
We do not know if they have fallen from the sky or if they crawled out of the bowels of the earth.
Within a few years, the Muslims occupied almost the entire Iberian Peninsula, with Cordoba as their capital. In 721, a group of Muslim raiders made a first foray across the Pyrenees. 11 years later, the Frankish city of Tours was the target of their advance.
Muhammad allowed these campaigns, these raids, to take place. They then gradually became incorporated into Islamic tradition. These were raids that in some way or another were aimed at spreading Islam.
To halt the Muslim advance, the Christian rulers have to overcome their internal enmity. Close to Tours, Odo and Charles Martel gather for a meeting of reconciliation.
Als wir uns das letzte Mal begegneten, war es in Feindschaft und im Kampf.
Ihr habt recht, so war es. Ich wollte niemanden...
Charles Martel reminds Odo of their old enmity and of the fact that Odo once sided with the Moors. But now, the Muslims are threatening the entire kingdom. Odo admits his earlier mistake. His admission paves the way for an alliance with Charles Martel.
Ein großer Fehler, für den ich bei Gott genug gebüßt habe.
Odo's main objective was to secure his position as Duke of Aquitaine, and to do this, he chose a double strategy. On the one hand, he made friends with Charles Martel, while on the other hand, he entered into an agreement with one of the Moorish leaders, and even allowed the man to marry his daughter. Ultimately, this double strategy failed to work, and Odo had to seek the protection of Charles Martel. He had no other choice.
But Martel's protection comes at a price.
Wenn ich mit euch gemeinsam kämpfen soll, Fürst Odo, dann nur unter diesen Bedingungen.
Martel will only accept Odo if he is subordinate in battle.
Stehen unter meinem Kommando.
Ihr werdet uns anführen. Lasst uns unser Bündnis besiegeln.
Odo agrees. The alliance is sealed with a religious relic,
Für unseren Kampf Karl.
the Holy Sponge, sent by the Pope for the fight against the Muslims. They believe this holy act will lead to victory. A monstrance in Aachen Cathedral contains a section of the Holy Sponge. In the days of Odo and Charles Martel, people believed it had magical powers. It allegedly alleviated the suffering of Christ on the cross. Will the holy relic turn the forthcoming battle into a holy war?
Christus ist unsere Hoffnung.
The Franks put their hopes in Christ. They intend to win with the help of the divine weapons. The divine relic is brought in to strengthen the Christian warrior's resolve. But it's equipment, troop numbers, and discipline that count on the battlefield. A Christian chronicle describes the start of the battle.
The men from the north stand like an unshakable wall. Their shields and chainmail glitter in the sun like an icy glacier.
The Franks dare the Moors to attack, spurred on by Charles Martel.
Offenbar gelang es,
Charles Martel apparently managed to lead his troops to a small elevation and thus take up a position that gave him a strategic advantage.
günstig war.
The Franks used their shields to counter the hail of arrows. Their battle lines remained solid.
تقدموا الآن. الله أكبر.
Despite repeated attacks, the Moors are unable to break through the Frankish ranks.
The steadiness of the Franks can be explained with their elevated position and with their discipline.
Diszipliniert standen.
The Christian military leaders also enter the fray.
Fürst Eudo, jetzt liegt es an euch. Geht nach unserem Plan vor, schnell!
Odo is ordered to follow Martel's battle plan. It involves a tactical maneuver to shift the odds in favor of the Christians. Abdurrahman decides to pursue the Frankish cavalry. But what exactly are the Franks up to? The Moorish ranks began to get worried. The sight of their leader riding away from the battlefield could be a sign of retreat, a potentially fatal misjudgment. The discipline of the Franks has already unnerved their opponents.
The second important factor was that Frankish troops attacked the Muslim encampment, whereupon sections of the Muslim army immediately left the battlefield and hurried back to their camp, fearing that they might lose their loot.
For most of the Moorish warriors, the loot was the main reason for this war. The attack on their encampment hit them at their most vulnerable point. The Carolingian chronicles use dramatic words to describe the Frankish maneuver.
Bravely, Prince Charles Martel called out to his warriors to charge the enemy. With the help of the Lord, they successfully overran their tents. Like doughty millstones, the warriors ground their enemies into powder. It was at this point that the Franks successfully encircled the Muslim leader and then killed him.
The Christian chronicles show respect for the enemy. They state that the Moorish emir died like a true warrior.
Wounded in the chest, Abdul Rahman died.
The Moorish army is now leaderless. Its resistance crumbles. The morning after the battle, the dead are counted. The Christian military leaders have also suffered heavy losses.
Sie haben tapfer gekämpft. Sie fürchten die
The Franks have respect of the enemy, who showed no fear of death.
Gott allein kennt ihre Zahl, Bischof Milo.
This Christian chronicle, written 20 years after the battle, makes no mention of troop numbers or losses. It merely records that Charles Martel led a coalition of European forces to victory, and that the leader of the Moors, Abdul Rahman, was killed in battle.
Da ist er.
But why would the Moors leave their dead leader behind?
Ist nur seine sterbliche Hülle. Als Märtyrer ist er längst
As
im
Muslims, they are convinced that he has already entered paradise.
Für sie leichter zu sein als für uns.
ihre Beute. Konnten sie
The Franks have won.
nicht in den Himmel und nicht dorthin, wo sie herkamen.
Martel is convinced that it won't be the last battle against the Moors.
Ich sage euch, sie werden wiederkommen.
In der Schlacht von Tours, also zu
At the
Beginn
Battle of Tours, that is in the early 8th century, the concept of a religious conflict played no major role, at least not on the Christian side.
selbst auf der muslimischen
On the Muslim side, the so-called Islamic expansion was of course aimed at increasing the amount of Muslim-held territory, but ultimately it was a matter of territorial conquest.
es aber sich auch schlichte Landnahme handelte.
It means that the battlefield near Tours was not the symbolic site of a religious war, as has been claimed in posterity. But it did mark the beginning of the end of Muslim expansion into Western Europe.
One shouldn't forget that even after 732, the danger posed by the Arabs was far from over. Charles Martel was certainly an important element in the defense of Europe, but by no means the only one.
The victor of Tours was later interred in the Cathedral of Saint-Denis, the burial place of the French kings. Charles Martel went down in history as the man who saved Christendom.
Charles Martel's victory over the Muslims further strengthened his reputation as a successful military leader who had fought and won several other battles, and not only against Muslims. In that regard, the success at Tours most certainly contributed to the rise of Martel's dynasty, the Carolingians.
One man in particular would benefit: Charlemagne, the grandson of the victor of Tours. In the late 8th century, the king of the Franks wants to extend his kingdom eastwards into the territory of the heathen Saxons. He uses all his military might to convert them to Christianity. Not only does Charlemagne want to conquer the land, he also wants his faith to rule over the minds of his subjects. The Saxons, who still worship the Germanic gods of nature, are to be baptized, if need be, by force. Western Europe's most powerful Christian ruler has the last pagan symbol smashed: the Saxon Irminsul. One God, one king, one faith, one empire. Charlemagne's vision of a Christian Europe under his rule. This is where it is forged, in Aachen. He converts his favorite city into a magnificent royal residence. It becomes a center of education and learning. A uniform system of writing is created as the basis of a shared Christian cultural region. His idea is expressed in the Palatine Chapel, today's Aachen Cathedral. The architecture symbolizes the concept of his rule. The church and the throne room are combined. Faith and power are united. A formula that will characterize Christian Europe for centuries to come. Around 800 AD, Charlemagne moves to Rome. He wants to associate himself with the legendary Roman emperors who ruled the world empire from this very city. On Christmas Day in the year 800, 68 years after the Battle of Tours, the grandson of Charles Martel is crowned Emperor of Rome by the Pope. At the same time, he becomes the protector of Western Christianity, a title that will make Charlemagne and his heirs the direct enemies of the rulers of the Muslim world. But for now, the Muslim territories coexist alongside those of the Christians in Europe. Gradually, the Christians will attempt to force the Muslims further south. Until then, culture and religious tolerance will flourish under the Moors on the Iberian Peninsula.
The age of Muslim rule in Spain was astonishingly productive from the cultural point of view, in every imaginable area, from agriculture to theology, and all of it derived from a lively exchange between Muslims, Christians, and Jews.
Multicultural Spain experiences an epoch of rapid progress that embraces all aspects of life. It would later be called the Golden Age of Muslim rule. There are great achievements in all areas of science, but especially in medicine. The Moors found the first paper factory on European soil. And under the Muslims, the windmill is developed into the most powerful machine of the Middle Ages. Spain becomes the center for the transfer of knowledge between East and West. The Christian world reaps the benefits. Even today, the structures of the Moors testify to the technical and architectural progress they introduced to Europe.
In the mythical places of Islam where a high culture was truly created, Baghdad, for example, Andalusia, Damascus, or Cairo, the high culture only came into being because Islam remained open to outside influences.
Baghdad. In the 9th century, the city on the Euphrates develops into a metropolis unparalleled in the Western world. Dozens of languages are spoken in the streets. Islam, the religion from the desert, develops into a world culture. A city planned on a drawing board. At its center, the palace of the Caliph, a successor of Muhammad. A golden age indeed, lasting another 4 centuries.
The high points of Arab-Muslim history aren't the result of warfare, but of open-mindedness and tolerance.
In Jerusalem, after it was conquered by Arabs in 638, Christians, Jews, and Muslims coexisted peacefully until the 11th century, when there is internal strife. The Pope immediately sends Christian crusaders to Palestine to reconquer the holy sites of Christianity. They're promised a heavenly reward. All their sins will be forgiven. The attack of the European Crusaders provokes a Muslim jihad. The era of the Crusades lasts 200 years, and hundreds of thousands of people are killed on both sides in this war of faiths. An emperor from the German Stauffer dynasty chooses a different approach. Frederick II. He wins Jerusalem back for Christianity, not by the sword, but by negotiation. An exception in this era of so-called holy wars. In the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire begins to expand. The Turkish Muslims conquer the last bastion of Byzantine Christendom, Constantinople. From the Bosporus, a march through Europe begins that takes the Turks as far as Vienna. Twice, the city fights for survival against superior numbers of attackers. In the end, a coalition of European forces emerges as the victor in a conflict that has been declared a war of religions. It marks the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire. In the early 20th century, the Western colonial powers control large parts of the Muslim world, excluding the Germans, whose Kaiser has declared himself a friend of the Muslims. Together with Islamic rulers, he wants to fight a holy war against the British and the French. But a rebellion in the name of Allah against the colonial overlords is fraught with risk and danger. In the First World War, the German Kaiser and the Sultan of the Ottomans become brothers in arms, but their joint jihad is defeated by the superior power of the British. Later, the withdrawal of the British from Palestine leaves a trouble spot in its wake that is just as dangerous today. In the future, Jews and Muslims will be in dispute over the Holy Land. The State of Israel has had to fight for its survival ever since it was first founded in 1948. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel gains control of all of Jerusalem, a deep humiliation for Muslims to this very day. Many decide to flee or are forced out of the city. For many, the conquest of the Holy Land legitimizes a new jihad. The notion gives birth to radical new ideas that turn a young Osama bin Laden into an Islamic militant. After the Gulf War of 1991, American troops remained stationed on Saudi Arabian soil, close to Islam's most important sacred site, Mecca. It's another reason why bin Laden forms Al-Qaeda, part of what he calls the World Islamic Front of the Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, against the superior might of the West. Planned in remote Afghanistan, the attack on the Twin Towers in New York changes the world. Yet, in the view of most Muslims, the self-styled Holy War fought by Al-Qaeda is nothing more than a criminal act of terror.